As you have already heard from our two ministers dealing with education, India is now poised for a major leap forward in the field of education of world class. India was at one time one of the greatest knowledge centers of the world. Mentioned Nalanda, for many centuries, we were the hub, and students from all over Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia, used to come to India to learn. It was only because of successive invasions and colonialism that we lost that status. But now what we are trying to do in the new circumstances is to re-establish India as a major hub for global education. The previous speakers have already spoken about the Indian situation. I'm going to deal with some more general matters. I had the privilege of being a member of the UNESCO International Commission for Education in the 21st Century, a document that has not received the attention that it deserves. I'd like to bring it to the notice of this distinguished gathering. It was chaired by Jacques Delors, the European statesman, and it had 15 members, which I also happen to be. And what we did in the course of this was to identify 4 pillars of learning. The 4 pillars of learning, that is what I'm very briefly going to talk about this morning. The first pillar of learning that we identified was learning to know. Vijnana, as we say, let noble thoughts come to us from every side. That has been very much part of our mission. What is happening now is an explosion of information. Every 5 years, the quantum of information doubles. Sometimes there is a danger that we may get washed away in this tsunami of information. There is so much information available now that we mustn't lose sight of the fact that from education, we've got to abstract education. And from education, we've got to distill wisdom. Because otherwise we tend to get lost in the totality of what we have. And therefore, I think it's tremendously important that our students learn to ask questions. The questioning mind has to be there. Education does not simply mean pushing information into the minds of children. We must be prepared to ask, we are a dialogic civilization. The Indic civilization. The Upanishads were dialogues. Very sharp questions were asked by their students. The Jain tradition is dialogue. Buddha himself personally dialogued for 60 years as he walked across the plains of India. So the dialogue, I think, is tremendously important. And we have to realize that this is a lifelong learning. Lifelong learning, it is not that it completes when you finish our courses. You've got to learn every day. I continue to learn. I was given, Rajya, on my 80th birthday, I was given the iPad for the first time. And I have written 20 books, traveled around the world, never used a computer. The fact that the human race can exist without a computer for thousands of years is something that the younger generation refuses to believe. But the fact is that it has. And the fact is that I've started learning the computer now. So one continues to learn as you go through life. The capacity to learn, the urge to learn, the creative spark, that must never be extinguished. So I think the first point, when we talk about the first pillar of learning to know, is certainly an information society, but it's constantly being updated. All the chemistry, all the physics, all the geography that we learned at school is now out of date. But if we have learned the capacity to learn, then our education has done us fine. So that is the first point I'd like to make, that the capacity to learn, the regular upgradation of skills both of the students and of the teachers. Because it is the teachers who really have to upgrade their knowledge all the time. It is only if the teachers have upgraded their knowledge that they can pass it on to the younger generation. So, learning to know, the first pillar. The second pillar that we identified was learning to do, the Karma Yoga. If learning to know was the Jnana Yoga, learning to do is the Karma Yoga. Kurvani Iva Karmani Jishe Karan Singh Evam Tvai Nami the Karma Yukti. I'm sorry for those who don't know Sanskrit, but I'm in the habit of throwing in a few appropriate Sanskrit shlokas, because these are thousands of years old. The quotation that I'm making now, that noble thoughts come to us from every side, or work for 100 years with dedication. These are ancient concepts embedded in the Indian cultural tradition. So learning to do is essential, because if you learn to know and you are unable to do it, and that is where what the ministers have mentioned, it is so important that the students are not only educated, but they are also trained to do something useful in developing global society. And it doesn't really matter what you are doing. There's a marvelous quote from John Gardner in a book, I think, called The Ambidextrous Universe, in which he writes, a society that honors philosophy because it considers it to be a noble profession, and looks down on plumbing because it considers it to be a lowly profession, will get the worst of both worlds. Neither its theories nor its pipes will hold water. So, the thing is really not what you are doing, and that's something that in our scripture is very clear, it's how you are doing it. You have a quest for excellence. Are you doing it with full dedication? There's a story of when the great Brideshwara temple was being built by Rajya 1,000 years ago in Tanjore, probably the greatest temple in India. And he went one day to inspect the work, and he came upon a man who was cutting stone. He said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm cutting stone." He went to the next man who was also doing the same thing. He said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm earning a living for my family." He went to the third man who was doing the same thing. He said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Sir, I'm building a great temple." So it's a question of the attitude. The first one was just a tamasic one. He was doing something mechanically. The second one was earning a living. But the third one realized that he was building a great temple. And what are we trying to do today? We're trying to build a great temple of knowledge. We're trying to build a sane, harmonious, and equitable global society. It's a very big task. We cannot do it unless we learn to do it with all our heart and all our soul. So learning to do is extremely important, and that is where the ITIs are so significant, because we have millions of children who come out of high school, and there's a meaningless drift to university where they just go because they have nothing else to do. But if you have those intermediate institutions, what we used to call ITIs in the old days, you have the IITs, which are at the top. But between the high school and the university, you need to have technical training institutes. And one of the ideas that we put forward in this report was that you could have an education voucher. You could say that you've studied to this extent, you can go off, you can get a job, you can work in society, and you can come back again after a while to continue your studies. The whole idea that education has to be linear is now out of date, because education, as I said, is a continuous process. Learning to know, learning to do. The third pillar, learning to live together. And perhaps this is the most significant one, because we are now living in a world that has been mentioned, has been unified by technology. It's astounding. You pick up a small machine and you press a few buttons and you talk to somebody in New York. I still don't know how it works. I don't know whether you do or not. I cannot understand. Then if you can't hear somebody in the next room, how can you hear somebody from New York? But you can do it now with a tiny machine. And we have how many? 90 million what, 900 million. We have 900, in a population of 110 million people, I'm missing a zero, we have 1.1 billion people. We have 0.99 billion mobiles. Almost everybody in India has a mobile. That's tremendous. But learning to live together means that we have to teach values of living together. Otherwise, you find even today, even as I speak, there are fundamentalisms, there are fanaticisms, there are hatreds, there are conflicts going on around the world even today. There have been more conflicts in the world since the end of the Second World War than there were during the war. More people have been killed, are being killed as we are today. Some in the name of religion, some in the name of nationalism, some in any other name. So we have, despite all our tremendous technological breakthrough, we have not yet been able to overcome the essential conflictual relationships that exist in human society. And for that, learning to live together has got to be the transmission of values. Education is not only the transmission of information, as the minister mentioned, it's the transmission of values. And I don't have the time to go into this in great detail. I just want to very briefly mention the 5 values that I think are tremendously significant. First of all, there are family values. The family is where the value system first begins. If the family is full of tension, and if the family is full of negativity, then the student is not likely to be able to live a harmonious existence. Therefore, family values, which revolve around 2 axes, the parent-children relationship and the husband-wife or the man-woman relationship. These are changing. The joint family is broken up as it had to. The nuclear family is also in danger. And therefore, these tensions that arise in the family, something has to be taught. They have to be taught how to look after. The parents have to be taught and the children have to be taught. The parents must realize that they cannot run the lives of their children. Indian parents tend to be too possessive. We want to run the lives of our children. It's not possible. As Khalil Gibran says, your children may come through you, but they do not belong to you. Each child comes with his or her own karma. And therefore, the parents must realize that. And the children must realize that simply revolting against the elders, simply having a negative attitude towards existing situations is not enough. If they have, they must first of all recognize and accept what has been given to them and then move on their own. And the man-woman relationship, again in our tradition, it is neither the absurd tradition in the East of the woman walking 3 paces behind the man, nor the equally ridiculous custom in the West of the woman walking 3 paces ahead. I find that very peculiar. The real place is for the woman to walk side by side, ardhangini, equal co-sharers in the adventure of life. That is the correct relationship. And this reminds me of a very amusing story. There was somebody in some country, I will not name the country for fear of a diplomatic incident. And he was posted there, Mr. Minister, and the women used to walk 3 paces behind. And he went off back to his thing, and 10 years later, he happened to be posted there again. And now he noticed that the women were walking 3 paces ahead. So he said to his friend, he said, I'm very impressed. You've had a social revolution in 10 years. He said, no, that's not it. We've had a civil war, and there are many unexploded mines lying around. So that's not the way we want to treat our women. We have to have the woman and the man both, because the feminine and the masculine is not simply in the outer world. It is within us. Each one of us in our psyche has the masculine and the feminine genes, if you like, consciousness. And there has to be an integration, finally, between them. So family values, then we have to teach societal values. societal values, punctuality. In India, I'm surprised we got the meeting off to a reasonable start today, because nobody ever turns up before 10 o'clock in India. And cleanliness, simple things. The other day, I was at a crossing in New Delhi, and a posh car drove up, and the man put down the windows and threw out an empty bottle of mineral water. I mean, that's not done anywhere in the world. You can't do that. But there is no awareness. This is a societal value. We cannot clutter. We are the biggest clutter bugs in the world in India. कचरा इतना इकट्ठा हो जाता है जहाँ भी देखो कचरा ही कचरा ढेर. So therefore we've got to be clean, we've got to be neat, we've got to organize ourselves. Societal values, helping the people who are less fortunate, helping the weaker people, not this bullying and badgering, but in fact. So unless we change our attitude towards society, unless we realize that we are part of society and that we have a debt to society, and we have to repay that debt through our actions and activities, we will never build a harmonious society. So there are family values, there are societal values, there are interfaith values. I have been involved for 40 years in the interfaith movement, which seeks to bring together people of different religions in a harmonious dialogue. We've had these world parliaments of religions around the world. The first one in Chicago in 1893, where Swami Vivekananda appeared so dramatically. In the 20th century, many organizations we've had. But unfortunately, the interfaith movement has still not moved into the center of human consciousness. I remember the environmental movement. I was on the Indian delegation in 1972 in Stockholm, where the first United Nations Convention on the Human Environment was held. And you can see how within 20 years it moved into the center of human consciousness. But the interfaith movement is still peripheral. People will spend huge sums of money on churches, on mosques, on temples and all, but the interfaith movement is nobody's baby. I submit and I suggest that that has to be there. We cannot teach religion in our schools because the Constitution prevents us from doing that. But we can teach religious values or spiritual values. Values are not the reserve of any particular religion. The values are universal, the values of love, of compassion, of kindness, of helpfulness, of respect to elders, of respect to other members of society. We have got to teach these. And we've got to realize that learning to live together is a very significant area. Then we have to teach environmental values, were mentioned. If our children have no idea of the importance of the environment, in our tradition we have these marvelous hymns to the waters, to the rivers, to the mountains, to the lakes, to nature, because we looked upon, our seers looked upon the human race as part of nature. We do not accept the fact that we are endowed with some divine will so that we can destroy other species as we like. We are also part of the evolution of life on this planet. And therefore the environment is part of us. And we are part of the environment. And we have to repay our debt to the environment. Otherwise, the way we are despoiling it now, we are going to destroy this world sooner or later. And then finally, we have to have global values to teach that we are very proud of being citizens of particular countries. The Americans are proud of being Americans. The Indians are proud of being Indians. Burkina Faso people are proud of. But the point is there are 200 different nations in the world. You can have 200 nationalisms, but unless you finally transcend these, where is the global society? One globe is your key. We have the ideal definition of one globe, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The world is a family. If you go to our houses of parliament, I'm not going to comment about what happens in parliament, Mr. That I'll leave our television viewers to judge. But when you go to the parliament building, on the first gate, there's a beautiful verse. Ayam nija paro veti gananam laguchetasam udar charita namatu Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. This is mine, that is yours, is a narrow and constricted way of looking at things. Udar Charitanam, for those of the greater consciousness, Vasudha Eva Kutumbakam. The world itself is a family. 5,000 years ago, the concept of one globe or one world. And that is what we must develop. The world is a family. Not only the world is a market. Market is all very well. But a market is essentially an exploitative structure, whereas a family is a supportive structure. And so this concept, that although we are proud to be residents of our country, we are also proud to be global citizens. In fact, I think that two things should be done. Every passport should be stamped India, planet Earth. Greece, planet Earth. And in every classroom should hang that beautiful photograph taken by NASA. You remember the photograph of planet Earth taken from outer space. That is the most. We are the only generation to have seen what our world looks like. And that photograph should hang in every classroom so that people realize that we are denizens of a tiny speck of dust hurtling through outer space. So beautiful and yet so fragile. That is the third pillar of learning. And the final value, learning to be. Now, learning to be is perhaps the most important. What is our inner consciousness? Are we aware of the depths of the human psyche? Are we aware of the luminosity that exists hidden within us? In every religion in the world, they talk of the light within. The Bible calls it the light that lighteth every man that cometh into the world. The Muslims call it the Noor-e-Ruhani. The Hindus here say, Vedaham etam purusham mahantam aditya varanam tamasa parasa. I have seen that great being shining like 1,000 suns beyond the darkness. Francis Thompson, in one of his poems, not where the wheeling systems darken and our benumbed conceiving soars, the drift of pinions would we hearken, beats at our own clay-shuttered doors. The angels keep their ancient places. Turn but a stone and start a wing. 'Tis ye, 'tis your estranged faces that miss the many-splendored thing. The many-splendored light of the Atman. The many-splendored light of spiritual consciousness. Do we ever plumb those depths? Or do we just skim across life and before we know it has passed us by? Life is not a meaningless journey from the womb to tomb. Life is a unique opportunity for spiritual growth and development. Therefore, learning to be involves developing our inner capacities, realizing the spirituality that dwells in every being. What Allama Iqbal says in a beautiful verse, खुदी को कर बुलंद इतना कि हर तकदीर से पहले खुदा बंदे से खुद पूछे बता तेरी रज़ा क्या है. खुदे की बुलंदी, the upliftment of the Atman, that is yoga. So these four pillars are there. Education is something which is very much more complex than simply computers. The computers may think they are very complex, but there are things more complex than the computer. And that is a human mind, human consciousness. And that is what we must develop. And friends, that is what you're all here for, I think, to work on. And I sincerely hope that India gives you the inspiration to understand the various dimensions of education. We have a marvelous definition for education. Ya vidya sa vimuchyate. Learning is that which liberates. It liberates us from fear, liberates us from fanaticism, liberates us from fundamentalism, liberates us from narrow thinking, and moves us into the realization of a global society. Thank you.